Jon Machota, theathletic.com, covers the Cowboys and the NFL with us on Wednesdays in the 5 o'clock hour. Craig Smoke, Paul Catalina, and David Smoke. Okay, John, I know this is really just a very generic question, and it all depends on what happens in front of them. But now that they've made all these moves, the trades they've had, if in fact you were to say priority position 1, 2, and 3, how would that be, in your opinion, on their draft board?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would start with 1 for me is defensive tackle. I just, for a while, have thought they needed to do more at defensive tackle. Obviously, it didn't work out with Tristan Hill, but man, I mean, they haven't spent a first-round pick on defensive tackle since Russell Maryland in '91. I mean, and I feel like we've talked about this for many years when the draft comes around. So I'm to the point now where I talk about it, I think about it, but in the back of my mind, I'm like, they're not going to draft defensive tackle because they never do in the first round. So I would say that'd be number 1 for me. Number 2 would be left guard. You know, there's that talk that came out of the league meetings last week about Terrence Steele getting some work at left guard, and they signed Chuma Edoga. I think that they talk about how they have bodies there, but I think they would really like to get a player there early in the draft, meaning when one of the first 3 rounds. I don't know that you necessarily need to take a left guard in the first round, but maybe in the second or third, that would make some sense. And then next up for me would be tight end. I mean, I like what they got in Jake Ferguson and Peyton Hendershot, and I think Sean McCune's a solid player. And this is a deep tight end class, so I'm not saying they'll do it in the first round, but when you look at this roster, it certainly could use another tight end with them losing Dalton Schultz.
John, running back obviously has to be a little bit a priority to them because they don't know about Tony Pollard, but are they maybe wrapping, like if you look at the visits they've had, are they kind of wrapping their arms around the fact that they don't really need to talk to Bijan Robinson and that if he's there, great. If not, then sometime later on?
That's the sense I get, but I don't get the feeling that he would even fall out of the teens. You know, I don't even think he would get there, to the 20s to where you'd really even start getting interested. So I do feel like it's almost like a CeeDee Lamb situation where, before that 2020 draft, like this time, like about a month out before that 2020 draft, there's no way we were talking about a realistic possibility that they were going to take CeeDee Lamb there. It was this team needs corner help, they need edge rusher help, and that Caleb-on Chason was there in that 2020 draft, and they still took CeeDee Lamb because it was like, this is just too good of a value. I feel that exact way about Bijan Robinson. If he's there, great. If not, I think they feel pretty good about the running backs that they can get in the second or third, maybe even fourth round that can complement Tony Pollard. Because I just don't think that there's another back that you put on that same level like a Bijan Robinson that you would take at 26. I think that you would wait till the second or third round or fourth round to do that instead. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure that they would be thrilled if Bijan Robinson is there because to me, 26, that's great value for a player that's one of your cornerstone pieces of your offense for the next 5 years at least.
All right, so are you ready for, if Bijan is available and they don't take him, that massive amount of just meltdown?
No. What's funny about that is I feel like, can you imagine, too, if it was like last year's draft? I mean, now we see a full season, so we know Tyler Smith is a good player. And we look at Tyler Smith like, hey, that's their left tackle for maybe the next decade. That's a great pick, But when they made that pick, you're sitting there going, man, I don't know about all of that, man. Jermaine Johnson was still out there, George Karlaftis, David Lloyd. I mean, there were some like really good players, Tyler Linderbaum and like some guys that we had talked about for a while. And they take Tyler Smith and you're left scratching your head. So can you imagine they do that in this draft? Like they sit there and Bijan Robinson's there at 26 and they take that Steve Avila, the left guard out of TCU. Of course, it fills a huge need, but man, that's not going to be the one that the fan base wants. And there's several levels to that because it's not just because Bijan Robinson is such a dynamic player and one of the biggest stars in this draft, but it's the Texas connection as well. It just seems like it's this no-brainer. I saw the Vegas odds on this, I think it was last week, that the Cowboys were the favorite to land him just because, well, one, it's the Cowboys and there's going to be a lot of people that bet on them, but it's just because it seems like it makes so much sense for him to go to the Cowboys. But I got this feeling, man, I just really think he's going to end up going to the Eagles. So any of those Cowboys fans out there that don't want him or don't want to take a running back in the first round, I don't know, be careful what you wish for because you might be seeing him 2 times a year.
John, they're never going to have the decency to suck bad enough to get the player that the fans really want. Like, I think that's where they are. Like, they're either going to be just this kind of good or just bad enough to where they're kind of in the middle and they still won't do that. That's been their story. But even with now on wide receiver, with Brandon Cooks in the fold, I know it doesn't become a priority, but they have brought in some guys for the workouts and talked to some. Is that something that they are kind of like Bijan? You know, if somebody like Quentin Johnson or Jordan Addison would fall to them, then they might have to go, all right, let's take a look at this.
I'm glad that you segued that in with the wide receiver talk, because when you started your question, all I was thinking about is that comment from Brandon Beane, the Bills GM. This was back in January.
Yeah.
And they were talking about them needing to get better receivers and getting a guy like a Jamar Chase. And he's like, I don't want to suck bad enough to have to get a Jamar Chase, which is so true because you got to be really bad to have a pick that high. And so, yeah, the Cowboys like being in this spot. They want to draft in the 20s. Heck, they'd like to draft in the 30s, because that means that you're doing well. But with this draft, there is no Jamar Chase, So what intrigues me about this wide receiver class and where I think it could really be in play for the Cowboys at 26 is that you just get the sense that everybody's going to have that top 4 or 5 wide receivers ranked just a little bit differently. And so let's say you're sitting there at 26, and we'll use Jalen Hyatt because he's one of their visitors out of Tennessee. Let's just use him as an example. What if they have Jalen Hyatt as the number 1 wide receiver in this class? Now, of course, 10, 15 other teams might have him as their 3rd best or 4th best. But if he's the number 1 wide receiver on their board, and he's there at 26, I think it's going to be hard for them to pass on them. So I think how every team has their board stacked up at that wide receiver position could have a big say in it because, yeah, if you're getting the 1st or 2nd best wide receiver you think in this class at 26, that's probably too good a value to pass up on.
The trades they've made, that's a little bit different. Is that influenced by anyone in particular in the front office?
Last week at the league meetings, that was funny how Jerry and Steven both when they were asked about being more aggressive this offseason, because mainly those 2 trades, obviously, with Gilmore and Cook. And they both tried to downplay it. Like, no. We've always looked at this stuff or whatever. It's like, yeah, you've always looked at this stuff, but you rarely make a trade like this. And then you do 2 in less than a month. Like, you can't sit here and tell me you're not being more aggressive. So they're trying to downplay it, but there's no question that they went into this offseason like, hey, we got to be more aggressive. And I think one of the reasons why they feel that way is because this is a huge year for Mike McCarthy. They want to give him every chance to have success. And let's be honest, it's a huge year for Dak Prescott, too. They want to give him every chance to have success and finally get past that 2nd round of the playoffs. And so because of that, I just think that whether it's Jerry, Steven, Will McClay, all together, all 3 of them, individually, whoever's driving the force, it's that the time is to win now. Aaron Rodgers is probably leaving the NFC. It certainly looks like the NFC is wide open. Our roster is set to win big now. We've been knocking on the door. Let's put a little bit more pressure on that gas pedal, and I think that's what they're doing right now.
Yeah, I mean, things have certainly worked out for them, John, but they do seem to get a little they believe themselves just a little too much. Like, a little bit less self-esteem would have been good in these last few years, right? Where they're like, we believe in our guys, and that's great, but sometimes like they bet on things to work out and don't seem to take in factors, and they, like with Amari Cooper and Michael Gallup, it seems like that situation finally occurred where they're like, sometimes you can't just expect things to work out for you because your last name is Jones.
Yeah, no, for sure. And you're right. They do stick to what their plan is, because I think that reported asking price last year on Cook, or not last year, but during the trade deadline, was around a 3rd round pick. Now they obviously got him for a 5th and a 6th. So obviously, and then Houston's taken on $6 million of the $18 million he's going to make this year. So the deal is a lot better this offseason. But I feel like that there are several teams across the rest of the NFL that would have been faced with that same deal last year that had that Cowboys roster. I think a lot of teams would have made that even on a 3rd round pick and been like, hey, let's just go for it. We clearly don't have that number 2 receiver. Yeah, we went out and got T.Y. Hilton, but we need more juice on the perimeter of this offense. We need a guy like Brandon Cooks. Let's get this deal done. I know it's going to cost us a little bit more. We don't want to give up a 3rd round pick. Let's be a little bit more aggressive here. But they sat back and they were confident they could get it done with what they had. And so I think that they look back on that, not spending more to replace Amari. They don't have regrets about moving on from Amari. They have regrets about not doing more to replace Amari. And so that's where I think a little bit of what we're seeing this offseason is a little bit of carryover from that.
All right, John, there's a note in the chat room from JG Neolardo. Man, I wish I had Machota energy every day. Dude loves his career.
That's the truth. I do. I really do. I mean, the only thing that's missing right now, I just want to see this team make a deep playoff run. I want to see them go, get to the Super Bowl and just see how crazy it can be then. I grew up as loving watching football in the 90s as a kid and seeing how dominant those teams were. I would just love to see how it would get if they could get back anywhere close to that level again.
John, do you get this feeling? We had when one of his books came out, Tim Cowlishaw wrote a book about the Cowboys in the 90s, and we had him on the show, and we're talking to him, and you and I are newer to covering this team. It's only been, since well after that run. But I said, you hear say this, and I feel like I'm covering the band after they got out of rehab. Like they're doing the blues album because that's what they like, but nobody wants to hear it. And everybody else, like those guys, got to, like Smokey, got to be there when it was really cool.
No, there's no question about that. I will say, though, the only difference, because I do like the band analogy a lot, because that is a really good one. I mean, I spent like $300 to go see Paul McCartney when he was in Fort Worth last year, because I was like, I don't know how many more times he's going to be coming. I don't care if anybody else is going. I'll go by myself, whatever, because you just want to see that greatness and be able to say you saw that greatness. And so I agree with you on that. The only thing I will add, though, is that like the style of music that the Beatles play, I don't think that that's gotten more popular. The NFL has gotten more popular than it was in the 90s. Yeah. And so because of that, that's where I feel like, yes, if the Cowboys got back there, is Dak as popular as Troy Aikman? No. Is CeeDee Lamb, Emmitt Smith, or Michael Irvin? Of course not. But if just this brand combined with the fact that it's been 27 years plus, I just think the energy would be so crazy if they got there, and then also the carryover of it. Because if they finally got there, you'd have a lot more faith that, hey, you know what, they know what they're doing. They do have the right recipe. They can keep building, and then who's to say that they don't go on another big run? But you got to see that first one to know that it's going in that right direction.
John, enjoy your job. I know you guys. There's two different old man jokes. That was kind of a shot at me.
No, absolutely not. I mean, it was just you were there.
No,
and you were at all those Super Bowls.
I was. I covered 7, 8, and 30, and 27 and 28 teams. They were unbelievable, and they could have easily have gone to 29.
All right, so you got to cover, and I'm a Cowboy. I grew up a Cowboys fan. You got to see the Cowboys win 3 times. John, the last Super Bowl I got to be at in the stadium, I had to watch the Eagles win.
That's right.
It was tough. Yeah. And then, listen to people talk about hoagies and having a good time. Yeah. In Minnesota, it was tough, to be professional during that time. But
yeah, it was a special time. That 91 team, the way they ended it, when Aikman was hurt and Berline, I think, took them until Detroit beat them up. Washington won it. Looked like they were going to be around for a little bit. But, man, that run they were on was phenomenal. It could have been even better had it not been for the salary cap. Thanks for your time. We appreciate it. Jon Machota, theathletic.com, on the Cowboys in the NFL. And appreciate